Well, I tried to promise Janet that I would at least do as good a job as she does. And so,
Not wrong, just different.
this is gonna be very different because it's gonna be different for me because as I was going through chapter 1 and 2, how many of you were able to read chapters 1 and 2? Yes. All right. So as I was going through chapters 1 and 2, I kept on having memories come up, until finally God said, share your testimony. Okay, I'll share my testimony. But I also want to stay true to your work and to Jen's doing, and so I'm going to try to weave in some of chapter 1 and 2. But I'm imagining, even as I was going through it, when we're done, you're going to go, I don't really, if you didn't read chapters 1 and 2, you may not feel like we went through chapters 1 and 2, but we did, right? We did. Still going to use a lot of her slides that she gave to me. So pray for me as I continue, because I don't share my testimony often, and it's been a long time since I have. So here it goes. Yes. Question. You don't have a book, right? So we're still looking for the books to come in, and so you'll have them by next week. So I'll try to scrounge a book together.
I can give her mine and then you just.
Okay.
No, we got it. We gave her ours. We have a couple.
We
have a couple copies.
Oh, we have a couple copies.
Yeah, well, there we go. Problem is solved. Thank you very much. All right. So
I need lots of help.
we're going to have to go kind of way back in the days of the mullet, way back in the days of where guys wore shoulder padded jackets and stonewashed jeans. Remember those? And so that's kind of where we're going to go back to the 80s when the wild was roam free, and where you would say, Mom, I'm going to go have a bike ride. And you'd be gone all day long, right? And if a police officer came to my house and said, where's your son, Marlene? She would say, out there. 80s was just a day. It was just a year. It was just a time like that. We didn't wear bicycle helmets. We didn't have things around a trampoline, and we jumped into creeks on rope swings and all that kind of stuff. I grew up in a good home. My parents are still married, and they still live in the same house that I grew up in. But it wasn't necessarily what I call a Christian home. My dad was. My mom and dad lived in a small town in Colorado called Hurley, Colorado. I don't know if you know where like Sterling is. It's way up in the corner of Colorado. You go any further north and you're going to be in Nebraska. That's how far north it is. And my dad tells a story that he went to church once when he was a teenager, but he sat down and the pastor of the church pointed at him and said, "Go away, come back when you get your haircut." And so he never came back. Mom was, she grew up in a Methodist church, and once they got married, of course, my family, we just never went to church. We went to church a couple times. I remember a couple things that was going on. But I remember also having friends who were Christians, and they would invite me to their youth group, and I would go to their youth group, and I would listen to them sing and talk about the Bible. And I remember thinking, this is weird. People don't normally just sit here and just talk about this book. I mean, so I really had no real interest in that. But I went because my friends invited me. My next door neighbor also was a Christian, and she would often share Jesus with me in different ways. But it never really took hold. And what began to happen next is I started getting into the teenage years and feeling this teenage angst and stuff. And so I remember going up to my mom and I looked at her and I said, I don't care what happens. Aliens, an invasion, because we'd just seen Red Dawn. Who's seen Red Dawn? Right? I don't care. An invasion from Cuba. I don't care. Something has to happen or I'm going to go crazy, because this is not what my life is going to be like, where I'm just getting up, going to school, going to my little job, coming home, and eating mom's food, getting up, going home. Notice I didn't say wash the dishes, but so that's all And I said, Mom, I don't know. This is just something has to happen. And I began to go into a kind of a dark time where there was my junior high experience was different, because bullies. What bullies do, they can target the kids that are most traumatized by bullies, right? Apparently they chose me, and it wasn't just me. They called themselves, this whole group of people, they called themselves the Super Friends. And well, yeah, and whenever you heard them say Super Friends, you knew to get into some hallway as fast as you can, because they would lock arms and they would just mow over anybody who was in the hallway. They did a lot of pushing, shoving. They would oftentimes push people into other people and try to start fights between people that were less able and didn't understand what was happening around them, and so they would hang a lot of them. And I got some of those things. Not getting any kind of excuses, and there's a lot of people who get bullied who survive and are able to withstand. There's a lot of kids who do, and I've met them. They're up in the youth group. There's a lot of kids who do. I wasn't one of those, and so it moved me into a place where I just felt invisible. There wasn't anything around me that I felt I could grab onto, who cared about me. My parents were, again, they loved me, but they were so busy doing things of life, like getting groceries and all that kind of stuff. I just felt this invisible time. And I remember I would make masks. I would go to, it was before Hobby Lobby, it was Alco. I don't know if Alco means anything, but so I would go and I would just buy craft stuff and I would just make these elaborate masks. Sometimes they were like African style masks, or sometimes they were more like superhero masks. I just remember making masks. And I would oftentimes just sit in front of the mirror and I'd put on these masks. That's what I would do all night long, was just make a mask and put it on, make a mask and put it on. There was nobody. No, how about this? There probably was, but I didn't hear them. There was no voice saying things like, "You don't have to think this way. You don't have to believe about yourself this way." There wasn't anybody who was speaking any kind of truth. It was I was just allowed to run free with my thoughts. There was no harnessing of my thoughts. So whatever came in my mind, it would carry its way all the way to the end of its, to where I began to acting out on those thoughts. And that took me into kind of my high school years, where, again, this is the 80s. And I want to be very careful about this, because there is some connection to it, but there was a certain particular game that was popular in the 80s. And I got myself involved with this game. They play it now, and we even play it today. The game was called Dungeons and Dragons. It was a role-playing game. Now, there was a big scare in the 80s called the Satanic Panic, right? There was all this thing going on about, you play the game, you're going to go kill yourself and all that kind of stuff. There was a big scare about that. And it was because of kids like me. It wasn't kids like I think Dennis. Dennis played it a lot, right? So Dennis didn't matter. For me, it mattered. Because here's what I was able to do. I took this invisibleness that I had and I was able to put a face to it. I was able to put a character to it. I began to realize that there's a life I can live that's beyond this boring, invisible reality that I And again, because no one is telling me about the real truth, I was just allowed to continue thinking this way. And I think that's the thing that was most traumatic about this, is because as I began to delve into some of the things that were parts of the game, I started realizing, I want to try to make this stuff more real. I want to try to make my characters more real. So I started doing a lot of research about what is wizardry, what is spell, what is this thing. And so I realized, hey, there's some real things out there. There's some people who seem to say that they have some real power, some real understanding. And so all of a sudden I found myself kind of getting involved with that. And again, I want to clarify and say not everybody who played got into that, but I did. I was one of those that did. And I flourished, and suddenly I had an identity for myself because I was able to make it. And one of the things they mentioned in the book, and I've actually there's a podcast that just came out. My wife and I listened to it just this morning. Shannon posted it on her Facebook page. That took me back to the garden, where Adam and Eve were wondering, can I make a name for myself? Can I make an identity for myself? Can I make my own choices? And I began to realize I thought that I could do this. I could start making a name for myself. And so by the time high school was over, I was steeped into what you'd all hear in college the occult. I was doing tarot cards, I was doing astral projection, I thought I was, all that kind of stuff. And so, and I was really involved with, I had some good friends that would take a bullet for me. I knew they were really good friends in terms of they benefited me. They didn't do anything good for me because they allowed me to be who I was. But so, as we moved along, my friends, I left the house and I said, "Mom, I'm out of here. I'm gone." So it was about a 2-year period where I didn't even go home. And so I just spent my time in Fort Collins, Colorado, which is a crazy place to live, and was at the CSU campus and was just doing a lot of things over there. And all the while, getting more and more involved with the occult, and I began to purge my life of all things Christian. If it had anything to do with what anybody said, from my growing up, I just said, it's gone, it's done. I would oftentimes go to those campus soapbox preachers that would stand on the corner and start preaching. I would go and I would just heckle them. That was my thing. I loved to do. I loved to heckle those guys. And I began to become, I guess, militant at the same time. And what I want to illustrate, what was happening as I was reading the book was, again, there was nobody around me that I could hear telling me, stop. You can stop. You don't have to keep on going. You can, right? So I just kept on getting more and more involved with the occult. So I'm now probably 20 years old, and I'm working at a bookstore. It's a chain. It's what now we call Barnes & Noble, but back then it was called, see if anybody knows. You know what it was called back then? B. Dalton Books. Remember B. Dalton, right? They're in Wall. Yeah. So B. Dalton Books. So I was working there, and I decided I was going to take the occult section of that bookstore and really just beef this thing up. And so I was able to compete with some of the weird bookstores in downtown Fort Collins. And I had a really great occult section. Let me ask you a question. Typically speaking, what other books are there along with those occultic New Age books? What's that? Astrology, spiritualism, and all of a sudden you get into more of, like, there's even some of those Bibles. Right. And so right behind me was the Bible section. So I was working on the occult section here, and all the Bibles were back here. I want you to picture that. And I was living. This is the part I don't like to say, but I was living with my girlfriend, and actually engaged at that time, and great group of friends. And I was feeling like there's still more out there, still more truth I can find. I was still searching for this truth, making things more real, trying to make my life more real than I felt. And I realized that there was no end to that. There's no end to things can always feel more real, right? So I remember wanting two things. I remember I wanted to go and start look for a community of people that were like me. So you would call them covens. You would call them. We just call them covens. But so I was looking for my occultic church is what I was looking for. And I remember being behind the counter of the bookstore, and there was another coworker, and I said, I was telling her about how I was feeling, about, there's just something more out there. And I remember she looked at me and she said, Steve, have you ever thought about Jesus? And I'm an artist, and so for some reason I feel like I have to clarify, this wasn't like a vision, but it was very picturesque in my mind. How many of you have ever been to a Mexican restaurant called Pancho's? Oh, yeah. What's famous about Pancho's?
Raise the
flag. Raise the flag. Literally, I pictured this little red flag just up like that. And I was like, and I was like, but my mom talked about Jesus, and I had a couple of friends talked about Jesus, but I haven't given her much thought about that. And I went about my work and just kept on thinking about that. And then I said to her later on that day, I said, so there's a bunch of Bibles back there. If I wanted to, which Bible would I read to know more about Jesus? And she said, what makes you think that you need to read a Bible to know more about Jesus? And another flag of, but this one was another feeling of, what she just told you is not true. Now, I look back on that day, and I know exactly what happened. And this is part of where the book came into this place, is to say that I was not a Christian. I was not looking for Christ. I was not looking for Jesus, but the Holy Spirit broke through and invaded my thoughts in a way that I've always wanted someone to say, stop, think this way. And suddenly I had this other voice say, what she just told you is not true. And that captured me. And I was like, what was that all about? I didn't tell any of my friends because they wouldn't understand, so I just kind of kept it to myself. But I did call one of my friends who I knew was a Christian and told him what had happened. And he said, I want you to read 2 books of the Bible. And I said, okay, which ones? And he goes, I want you to read the book of Job and John. What I didn't hear him say, what I didn't understand, I thought he meant read Job, then read John. What I heard him say, read Job and John. So I started reading John, and I started reading Job at the same time. I started going through like this. And it was weird. I mean, I was like, what is this Jesus? I mean, the way that John describes Jesus with the miracles and I am statements, I'm like, what is going on? But Job. So let me tell you what happened with this. So here I am. I'm still thinking about those 2 experiences where now I know it was the Holy Spirit saying what she just said. Have you ever thought about Jesus? This is true. And then where do you find him? And you don't need a Bible to know more about Jesus. That's not true. That still was just swimming in my head. At the same time, I was thinking about what my life was looking like, and even as I started comparing, how many of you know a lot about Job, the book? Right. So Job has 3 friends, right? There's 3 friends in Job. And Job has traumatic things happen to him. And it's revealed in Scripture that it's Satan who's doing it to Job. And God's letting it happen. And his 3 friends don't know this truth, and Job doesn't know this truth. We do because we were reading it. But Job's friends say things like, you must have done something wrong that caused you to do the way that what happened in your life, some kind of cosmic karma. You did something and you're paying for it. And I was like, yes, that makes sense, because that's part of where I was at. That makes sense. And I hear another friend say something else about how Job was at fault. And I was like, yes, that makes sense. And then I read his other friend, his third friend, say some things. And I was like, yes, that makes sense. I was like, yeah, I was agreeing with all of Job's friends. And at the same time, I was thinking, what hope do I have if I'm agreeing with these guys? And I know that they're the bad guys of the story. I'm realizing that. And I'm like, but I'm agreeing with these guys. And so started to feel more kind of back into that kid life, that kid mentality of who really is for me, who really is on my side, who can hear me, who can know me, does anybody love me? What is all this going on? Because then Job speaks, and Job says the same things I'm thinking at this moment. Job is saying, I didn't do anything wrong. I don't know why all this is happening. It's just I must just be the victim of what God's doing, or what is going on. I don't know what is going on. And I was like, right on, Job, right on. All the while I'm reading about Jesus healing, Jesus moving through the crowd, Jesus doing all these things. And then I get to Job chapter 40 and John chapter 14. And I consider that, I don't know why you wouldn't think I'd be there at the same time, but that's what happened. So here's what Job 40 says. And then God spoke. So all of Job's friends spoke. So Job spoke, all of his friends spoke, and now God said, it's my turn to speak. You guys remember what he said to Job, Job specifically? He said, where were you when I made the foundations of the earth? Did I give you any kind of counsel? Did I need you to give me any? Let me tell you who I am. And I was blown away by that, because suddenly I just pictured this omniscient, transcendent God that's out in the cosmos, who's overarching, hands spread out, and has the whole cosmos in his hands, and he's paying attention to it all. And he's the very smallest detail he has in his hands. I'm just looking at this, and I'm like, oh, this is a big God. And I had just thought it was God, grandfather in the sky. You pray to him, and he gives you the things that you pray for. That's what I thought Christians were doing. They pray, and they would get things from God. But here I'm here reading about this God that has the cosmos in his hands. And then I read John chapter 14, when Jesus is talking to his disciples, and he says, I'm going away, and where I'm going, you're not going to be able to follow me, but I'm going to come back. And I'm not going to leave you as orphans. So, that's what broke my heart. Because here's God, big, huge, omniscient, omnipresent God, all of a sudden going, you. This is why I didn't want to go here, but here I am. I can't. So time right now my memory is kind of blurred, because all I remember thinking was, I'm not alone anymore. There isn't anything more that I have to look for, because he just said he's coming for me. All right. so I can regain my composure. Let me go through some of the things in the book and touch on, because we're not finished yet with the story. So when we were reading these things, I forgot to ask you this question, so I'm sorry. If you have time to do that. So there's some common misconceptions about what bondage is, and as I was reading, I was picturing that little kid that was growing up into the teenager, growing into the young man, and every step he was taking, it was in one more shackle, one more shackle, one more shackle, one more shackle. And I was just a regular guy. I wasn't doing anything. So this is some things he pointed out. So in here he says, demons were active when Christ was on earth, but their activity had subsided. So my experience here with this is that I was realizing that I wasn't just letting my own thoughts take over. I was actually hearing new thoughts. And what we call them demonic thoughts. And so he poses this question, and he kind of answers it later on in the text. And he says that really it's the same, but we've just got new names for it now. So what we would have said back then would have been a medium or a demon. Now with the New Age movement, you hear channeler and spirit guide. What are some other names that you've heard talk about? Re-referencing what we think of or what the Bible would say is a demon. What are some other words you've heard? Anything?
Tarot reader.
What's that?
A tarot reader.
Yeah, so tarot cards versus like those rune stones or anything. So there's also familiars, all those things. And so the old ways are still there. We just call them different names. And this is the part that I want to illustrate here, some scripture, and I want to pose it to say this is what I was not getting, was not listening to. This is what I had. If I had some of these voices, I don't know what my life would have been like. Here's Matthew. Jesus answered, "The one who sowed the good seed is the Son of Man. The field is the world, and the good seed stands for the people of the kingdom. The weeds are the people of the evil one, and the enemy who sows them is the devil." The picture there is this, a farmer, a sower, and he's casting out seeds. But this guy is not a good guy. He's sowing the weeds, designed to choke out the truth. So I wonder with what kind of weeds were around me that kept me from hearing the truth. What kind of things did I do for myself that plugged my own ears? This other verse, 2 Corinthians 10, 3-5. For though we live in the world, we do not wage war as the world does. The weapons we fight with are not the weapons of the world. On the contrary, they have divine power to demolish strongholds. Had I known that, had I heard that there's this God that we're looking at is one who says, I will demolish the strongholds that are surrounding you. We demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God, and we take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ. This phrase here, take captive every thought. I mean, even now, as Christians, how many of us really take captive every thought that we have? It seems like whatever comes to our mind, we just seem to let it happen. We just say, okay, for whatever reason. Sometimes we say things like, I deserve it. Sometimes we say things like, this is just who I am. But to say that every thought, take captive to make it obedient to Christ. These are the things that when God called me to become a youth pastor, that I said, this is why, because I want to be the voice that I didn't have or that I didn't hear. I want to be this voice to say, you don't have to let every thought just go. All right, you get that, right? And this is the other thing he brings up, and I think Janet put some of her knowledge into this, but I like it. Here's what happened to me, and this is why by this time here, I would say that I was getting involved with playing the game that allowed me to recreate myself is because that I was learning habits and being rewarded for the habits that I was doing, and it became cemented in my brain. There are habits that you make that create pathways that are hardwired into your brain, and those pathways are hard to break. We notice this when it comes to pornography addiction. Those pathways are hard to break because it's a neurological hardwired pathway where the brain is now kind of learned to function this way. And so not only is it now looking at the emotional aspects, so because I was an emotional kid, but my emotions now were changing my brain. The people that I was around was changing my brain. This podcast is suggesting that some of the internet stuff that we have, social media stuff we have, we've heard all those things about how the algorithms change the way you think. But this podcast asks the question, is it changing our soul? Is it affecting our belief about ourselves? Is it taking us back to the garden where we can say, I can recreate myself? It doesn't take long to look and see a whole generation of kids who feel like they can recreate themselves. This digital identity that they have is exactly the same kind of identity that I tried to recreate in this gaming room. So when we have this generation of kids going, I've been able to recreate my digital identity, but I know who I am in real life, and those two things don't jive, we see some really depressed kids. So I like this part, what he says or what Janet is putting in. I can't tell which one is which. So here's the other part, Ephesians 6:12 through 17. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. Therefore, put on the full armor of God, so that when the day of the evil comes, you'll be able to stand your ground, and after you have done everything to stand firm, with the belt of truth buckled around your waist, with the breastplate of righteousness in the place, with your feet fitted with the readiness that comes from the gospel of peace. I can preach on this for months, right? What this is. And some of you may have already kind of get an idea of what this armor of God looks like. But this part here that's underlined, had teenage Steve Alberts really processed what that meant? I don't know. I can't help but think that would have changed some direction, some legacy direction I was taking. Last one here. This is the war that I lost. Be alert and sober-minded. I wasn't alert, and I wasn't sober-minded. In reality, too, drank like a fish. Your enemy, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, looking for someone to devour. Resist him, standing firm in the faith. I didn't resist him. I just let him take over. I just let the enemy just wash over me. Because you know that the family of believers throughout the world is undergoing the same kind of sufferings. I lost this war. And now I'm at this place where I'm reading the truth. The truth that broke through. So demonic influence is only evident in extremely violent behavior and gross sin. So he brings this point up. I bring it up to say that again, I wasn't a violent kid. I wasn't a kid that was going to the principal every day. I was actually had perfect attendance in high school. I had I had relatively good grades. I wasn't a great student, but I had okay grades. I didn't cause any problems. So this is true. A lot of times we think about the evil one. We think about those that are really under the influence as the people that are like wringing their hands and they're twirling their mustaches and like, ha ha ha. No, it's regular people. And most often those people are hurting right next to you. A powerful image that I had before was, I saw a video, it was a lifeguard posted it at the beginning of summer and said, here's a video of a kid who's drowning. Have you guys seen a video like that? it was a video. The kid didn't drown and die, but the video was showing what it looks like for a kid that's drowning, and the kid was in the middle of his family. It was a little boy, and his family was all around him, and they were playing with the inflatable ball, and he just was bobbing up and down. And every time he would bob, he got lower and lower and lower into the water. Because drowning people don't splash around and call for help. Drowning people have one goal: save my life. And so they're trying to, they try to like get on top of the water, and it doesn't work. And they just go under quietly. Quietly. Most of the drownings are the family or the friends didn't even know they were drowned. This is what we find. We find kids and adults too who are being influenced by Satan, who are being influenced by the demonic thoughts, and I'm using those words on purpose. Those things that are really destructive and destroying people's hearts and souls, and like mine was. Some problems are psychological and some are spiritual. That's what brings us up, and we're going to stop right here with this. Because at this moment, when I'm hearing someone say, when I'm hearing from ancient words, 2,000 years old, the words of Christ say, "I will not leave you as orphans; I will come to you." Something happened in my body, and I'll tell you this in a second. You've seen this chart before. We use this a lot here at Colonial Hills. This is a picture, a diagram of what we would say is the view of man. This is what man looks like. The word is, for those of you that want a big seminary word, this is called the trichotomy view of man. Right? You get that, it's 3. So there is the body, soul, and the spirit. And we feel like this is kind of a good illustration of how we as humans function. We're made in the image of God. God is triune. It would make sense that we are also, in a sense, triune in that sense of being 3 parts. The body is dealing with this stuff here and the brain matter. The soul deals with mostly those thoughts and the emotions, and then the spirit. I didn't have this part, right? So this part was not in that illustration because I wasn't a Christian at this time, and so just imagine all my input was coming from the outside. I was just reacting to all the stuff that's going on the outside. I was reacting. I was playing defense. There was no moment of playing offense. I don't know why I want to tell this story, but I will. My son plays football. It's a 6-man football. If you ever watch 6-man, it's crazy. But we played against a team that was, I don't know where they got these boys. These were like ranch hands. They were like, they must have been like doing cows all day long. These were huge kids. And I'm looking at, I don't know if you've seen Wesley, right? And I'm looking at Wesley and I'm looking at this, number 22. I don't know where they got this kid. But he would run and he was fast. Our guys would come up and literally go bonk, bonk, and just bounce off him. When he hit, our kids dropped, right? They 45 this, which means they got 45 points in the first quarter. And why am I telling you this story? I don't know.
You were all on defense.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's it. That's what it was.
No offense.
There was no offense. Oh, our boys were coming off the field going, I don't know. I don't. The parents were in the field. By the time the second quarter hit, second quarter, we're just like, just get the ball and down it. You're done. You played a good game. You're good, right? So some of the football dads are going, no, you pounded. These kids were like, they were.
Sometimes they're better.
Anyway. So I didn't have any offense. I was just reacting to everything. All right. So let's see here. Yeah, so this is the part, he brings this up, the center of the secular world is self. That's exactly where I was. So I didn't have the spirit part inside, in sense of what God's spirit. I had me here. Everything was me. I wanted to be in control of everything. So here is the center of the secular world is itself. That's all that I had at this moment. And then he brings this up, and I wanted to mention this. So I think it's important to understand that we can talk about the body, soul, and spirit in a way that is academic and makes sense, and we can tie a lot of illustrations to this. But in reality, we're just one person. And here's what I mean by that. If you think about the brain, where's the visual part of our brain? You know where that's at?
In the brain.
In the brain, but where at in the brain?
Oh, I thought you were being facetious. Like it's in the brain.
Yeah.
I don't know where in the brain, but it's in the brain somewhere.
I learned. My sons and I, we go through weird memes and stuff. And this has nothing to do with the Bible study at all. But it said, "You don't have a skeleton inside of you. You are inside the skeleton." And I went, "Oh, what?" That was all right. So the part of the brain that seems to process imaging is in the back, right? But if you were a brain surgeon and say, "I'm going to cut out that portion of the brain," that surgeon would be like, "I don't know exactly where does the visual part stop and because it's all one thing, right?" So you guys know this. How many times does the way you physically feel affect the way you mentally react? The way you feel mentally can change how you feel physically. It's all so related that it's almost like, okay, which bucket are we, if you're trying to fix things, you're like, okay, is this the physical bucket? Is this the mental bucket? And so when I was a youth pastor doing camp, what I'd usually do is if a kid came to me with a problem or with a struggle that was like causing them distress, the first thing I would say was, "Hey, go take a nap." Because a lot of times just being sleep deprived was enough to catch up on sleep. Okay. So separating that into separate parts is a false illusion. It's great for us to talk about academically, but ultimately we're all one person. My wife's reading a book called The Body Remembers, and it's a great book about how the body remembers trauma. All right, so this is where I'm going to get at here, and in 10 minutes, right? So, so here I was reading Job and John, and I just heard Jesus tell me, "I will not come to you, or I will come to you, I will not leave you as orphans." I suddenly realized that Jesus was real. The reality that I've been looking for, Jesus was real. So I was working at the bookstore, and I remember going home that night. I was driving my car. I had what I call it my Pintang. It was a Ford Mustang on a Pinto body. It's when Mustangs weren't really cool. It was a dark day for Mustangs, but it was a hatchback. But anyway, wait a minute. Oh man, Jan's gonna kill me. So I was driving in the rain, and I was bawling, like Texas tear-size bawling. And I remember looking at the turn signal. It was the green arrow. The green arrow, for some reason, meant a lot to me. So here I am looking at this green arrow, and I'm turning. And so in the occult, and when you're doing all your stuff and your moves and these things, you're supposed to visualize all those things that you see in Hollywood. So we oftentimes think of spiritual warfare and demonic stuff, and we think of Hollywood. Don't think of Hollywood. You can't think of Hollywood because it's going to mess you up. So here I was all of a sudden, but now I remember saying this: Jesus, if you're really who you are, if you are who you say you are, I cannot do this anymore. I can't. I just can't. And it was a very physical thing. And this time I can say it's very physical. Very physical. It was like there was no air in that car. I couldn't breathe. And I was making my turn. And then I have a visual, I call it my mental palace, my mind palace. It's a Sherlock Holmes thing. But it's this room full of chalkboards. And there's all these things, and I write those things on some things I want to remember for a long time. I write them on these mental chalkboards. But I looked at this chalkboard that I had. It had all of my symbols and chants and incantations and all that on this board. And it was like this big, huge eraser, shulk, and just erased it. To this day, I can't remember. There's some ones I can, and I'm finding that over the course of my 20 years of youth ministry, they're the symbols that I can see and recognize and see when a kid's in trouble. But other than that, it's just this big eraser, just erased everything. Then I said, God, I am going back to my apartment where I'm living with my girlfriend. I'm apart from my family. Where do I go right now? And he said, go home. You're safe. That was it. Go home. You're safe. And home, he meant to the apartment. To the apartment was home. So now all of a sudden, this is when I became a Christian. No doubt in my mind, this is when I became a Christian, because now I'm having thoughts that are not my own, and there are thoughts that are healing for me, that are good for me, that are coming from a different place than myself. And it was so powerful. As I'm reading some of these things that Janet puts in from another book, this is kind of what was happening. For a long time, I was in this cycle over here of hearing from the devil or the world, and it was going back and forth here. But now all of a sudden, I had the Spirit of God living inside of me, and He's speaking to me, and it's making another cycle this way, and I'm watching my spirit just be healed, and it's more and more every single day, getting more and more restored. I taught my Bible study this morning, and one of the ladies, Linda Louder, said, the nature of God is redemption. God acting on His own is a God of redemption. And so here is God redeeming me, and I'm feeling it in a very physical way, an emotional way, a mental way. Everything about this, I was feeling it. So this is I like this picture because it was a real picture of what was happening. So some truths, there's no inner conflict, which is not psychological, because there's never a time in your mind, emotions, and will are not involved. Here's what I wanted to say. If we're not careful, then we think that there's things we do with our body that are body things. There are things that we do with our mind that are mind things. But as soon as this happens, we become Christians, guess what happens? Everything's spiritual. Everything is spiritual. There's no longer, do I do this with my body? Do I do this with my mind? Do I think these thoughts? Do I do these things? It is now spiritual. Everything is spiritual. It was like God put a fire hose in my mouth and just said, "Get ready, Steve. It's going to come," and it didn't stop. So everything becomes spiritual. Freedom from spiritual bondage is the result of a power encounter with demonic forces. Now, he makes a statement, and it's a false statement. Freedom from spiritual bondage is not the result of a power encounter. I didn't want Christ. I didn't ask for Christ. I didn't seek out Christ. Christ broke through my life and said, "This is who I am." And I'm not going to overpower these things with even though the cosmic God could do that. I'm just going to confront all these things with truth. And it was limited truth. You know, when Jesus talks about the mustard seed, I mean, one phrase, "I will not leave you as orphans, I will come to you." Boom. Suddenly, that was enough for me to realize that truth changes everything. Changes everything. And it was never a power play. To this day, I've never felt like Christ was like barging in and taking over. It's just, I'm going to confront it with truth. Confront it with truth. And Scripture is that truth. And I love this. I think Janet put this together. the stairway of truth, take a picture of this, because this is really cool. You can see the process of these steps. Now, it's not like this step plus this step, or this verse and this verse and this verse, but it is this process of going from one truth and growing, if we could say growing in Christ, growing in this knowledge of Scripture. So starting off with, the truth shall make you free. I am the way, the truth, and the life. The Spirit of truth shall guide you in all truth. And if you will be sanctified by the truth, then you can stand firm, having girded your loins with truth. And here is, whatever is true, dwell on these things. And so this is this new pathway that I'm on now. Still, to this day, I'm on this to this day. Because this made all the difference. The resurrected, living Christ made all the difference. If it wasn't for this, then Paul says it'd be all in vain. But it's not. Because of time, I'm going to go past this one. So Janet used this for some of her other presentations. I'm honored by that because I drew this picture, right? And I'm showing it to you now, maybe as a little bit of a flex. I don't know. But
You flex, Steve.
you flex. But it is a picture that I drew a while back. Can you see it? Oh. So this is kind of the picture of how I felt. I remember seeing a lot of drawings of and art pieces about the armor of God, and there's this stout guy with this strong arm. But how many of us sometimes feel like this guy, right? He's beaten up, he's battered, he's worn, but at the same time, he's still standing. And I tried to make his face look like he just got beat down 45 in the first quarter, and he's getting back up, and he goes, all right, let's go, right? He walks back into the battle. There's no need for Christians to defeat the devil. Christ has already accomplished that, and we simply need to believe it. And I would even say, believe it is not even a strong enough word for this. It is the Christian's responsibility as a believer to repent and believe that the truth will set you free. And so then Jenna asked this question, why would we be told to take up our armor if we did not need it? Even if you're battered and bruised and battered and dented up, there's still armor. You get up, you get up, you get up, you get up. So that takes us on a different path. This different path, this is part of chapter 2, this different path is now no longer self. Look for my truth, look for my truth. Now it is deny yourself, take up the cross, follow Christ. There's a phrase I hate. Maybe hate's a strong word. No, it's not. Self-care. Because I think when people talk about self-care, they're talking about self-indulgence, not self-care. Because oftentimes self-care means doing the hard things. Self-care oftentimes means denying yourself. Self-care often means that you're doing something for somebody else, not yourself. Self-care is when you're doing something that's not of your own accord, but you're following another thing. We talk about self-care, and I get some of the ideas of being able to take a break. And I think, the 80s generation, most of us in this room, really didn't do a very good job with our mental health. I'll grant it. I agree. This is the message I did not get. So now there's a different path. I love the phrase, my wife uses it a lot. She said, she'll do this with the boys. She'll say, you don't have to act on how you feel. Be angry, that's fine. Be angry, be mad, but you don't have to act on that anger. Be sad, but you don't have to act on anger because you're on a different path. You can do something different. You can be sad and still deny yourself. You can be sad and still take up your cross, right? So these things are all on a different thing. I told the story, and I'll do this. You might have to give me 5 more minutes. Is that okay? All right. So if you have to go to get your kids, I understand. There's a story I've told before where Marshall and Wesley, they're my 2 boys. They were about 11 and 8, something like that. And Wesley comes out of the room and he's bawling, he's crying because Marshall broke my Lego tool. I was like, he just broke it? Like Reset just broke it like that? He goes, yes, that's exactly what happened. I was like, And so I brought Marshall out. Marshall comes up. I said, Marshall, did you break Wesley's toy? Yes. Why? I was mad. So literally he did so. That's what he did. Right? And I thought to myself, okay, I got a couple things I could do here. I could say, Marshall, don't break your brother's toys. I could say, Marshall, you're not a good brother because you need to be nice to your brother. You need to learn how to share. I could do all of those things. But instead, and this is not from me, this is coming from this pathway, right? I said, Marshall, when you reached out to that toy, knowing you wanted to break it, was there ever anything in your heart and your mind that said, you don't have to do that, stop? And Marshall goes, yeah. And I said, I want you to remember this because that's the Holy Spirit speaking to you. You don't have to do this. You're on a whole different path. You have a whole new mind. You have a whole new heart. You don't have to act on what you're feeling. He does a lot. Sometimes he doesn't. So breaking down that pathway, denying yourself, denying self-rule. Until we deny ourselves that which was never meant to be ours. Did you read that? Until we deny ourselves that which was never meant to be ours. The role of being God in our lives, we will never be at peace with ourselves or with God, and we will never be free. Oh my goodness. Take up your cross daily. We pick up Jesus Christ's cross, not our own cross. We are to acknowledge every day that we belong to God. You know, I'm going to stick here for a second. I had a friend who said, if you feel pain, if there's a sin that you've done, that you need to, he said, hold it, look at it, make it yours. Take responsibility for it, and then throw it away. Toss it back out there. It's not yours to hold on to. Own it. Don't own the responsibility for it, but it's not yours to keep or grab onto. We're to acknowledge every day that we belong to God. Galatians 2:20. We have been crucified with Christ and no longer live, but Christ lives in me. The life I now live is a body I live by faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me. He will not leave you as orphans. Follow Christ. We must follow Christ by being led by the Holy Spirit, not by our own self-effort. And I want to finish with this. This is Paul's introductory prayer. Just let this just wash over you, okay? I pray that the eyes of your heart may be enlightened in order that you may know the hope to which he has called you, the riches of his glorious inheritance in his holy people, and his incomparably great power for us who believe. That power is the same as the mighty strength he exerted when he raised Christ from the dead and seated him at his right hand in the heavenly realms, far above the rule and authority and power and dominion in every name that is involved or invoked, not only in the present age, but also in the one to come. This prayer takes Christ, who says, I'm right next to you, I'm coming for you, and then says, and where I'm going to take you is back to that huge, immense, cosmos creating God. It says, we are in this together. We're in this together. This is chapters 1 and 2.